We want to thank our sponsors for today's shiur. Thank our sponsors for today. To the Zimmelovers, who are sponsoring today's learning in memory of Karen's mother, also Rabbi Glatt's grandmother, for those keeping score at home. Esther Ettelbas Zalman Yosef is also Esther Ettel, of course, is his newest daughter. We had the zchus of having the second shiur after her. So I joked with Rabbi Glatt that his grandmother, and of course Karen's mother, is leading the league upstairs with shiurim, Sunday shiurim being sponsored. So she has 2 Sunday shiurim in her zchus. What a special honor. Only 4, because whenever you sponsor the Sunday morning program, you get both shiurim. So this is great. So really, she has 4 shiurim of Torah sponsored in her memory. What an incredible zchus for the majority of people in this room. Unfortunately, myself not included, who knew her. Now I'll get to know her namesake. Bezras Hashem. How about that? We'll try. We'll do the. We'll offer that. Okay. So thank you to the Zimmelovers for that. So we continue. We had a break from this with a normal scheduled broadcasting, as they say, and we took a little break, but very apropos. We spoke about davening out loud, davening to ourselves, based off of Ramban and Parshas Bo, which of course came up in the Parsha. So I took a little break, but kept it tefilah themed. I think that was acceptable as well. So we were in the middle, towards the end of Mizmor L'Soda, so I don't want to cheapen you out on such a beautiful tefilah of Mizmor L'Soda. But we'll be spending most of today discussing Ashrei. So we'll just say an interesting idea about Ashrei, and then we'll conclude Mizmor L'Soda, and then get back to Ashrei. So we know it's hard to say the most important, but I'm going to say it based off halachic literature. The most important phrase of Ashrei is, right? Hashem you open your hand and satisfy every living thing. We'll explain why that's so important. The Gemara offers that as one of the possibilities why we think Ashrei is so important, because that one phrase. But at the very least, on a halachic level, we know that if you have no kavanah for Ashrei, not the end of the world, but if you have no kavanah for that one phrase, you have to repeat the whole Ashrei. You have to say it again, or at least repeat that phrase. So that phrase is incredibly important. Poseach es yadecha, it's the pay. So we're following the aleph beis, so it's the pay. Poseach es yadecha. So we tend to think of that. I heard an interesting idea actually this week. We'll get to that. Very good. We'll get to the nun. We'll get to the skip letters. We'll talk about that. But we tend to think of Poseach es yadecha as a metaphor, allegory, I guess. It's Hashem, you open up your hand. He doesn't really have a hand, but he opens up his hand. Everything in life, we say this all the time, the hand of God, everything's in the hands of Hashem. It sounds like a metaphor, sounds like a way that we can sort of connect to the Ribono Shel Olam. Similarly, in Modim we say, Kol chayinu misurim b'yadecha, that our lives are misurim b'yadecha, are in your hands. It's a theme that we say throughout our davening, and it's also, I think it's a pretty common phrase, not just in the Jewish world. Everything, it's in God's hands. It's an expression. So it sounds like it's a mashal, a parable, an allegory, right? So Rashi on last week's parsha, actually 2 weeks ago at this point, on Az Yashir says we say in the Shira, in Shirat Hayam, we say natisa yemincha telema aretz, that you tilt your hand and the earth swallowed you up. Talking about the Egyptians, swallowed them up. So Rashi says, we know everything's in Hashem's hands. Again, the phrase we're familiar with. So when he tilts his hand, what happens? If we're in God's hands, so if he tilts it, we fall. Right? It's the simple way of understanding it. So when we say we're in Hashem's hands, sounds like through Rashi, I heard this from Rabbi Daniel Gladstein, understanding of Rashi, but it's not that it's not a figurative way of understanding. It's not figuratively we're in Hashem's hands. No. We're supposed to envision that we're all in a big hand, right? And what happens? The hand of Hashem, and we live in that hand, so to speak. And when Hashem tilts his hand, the world falls. Terrible things. I mean, we know, we believe in God's omnipotence, so we know that this isn't like some would suggest, well, maybe God was sleeping at the wheel, and that's why the hand tilts. We don't believe in that. But at the very least, we believe. Why God tilts his hands at certain points, that we don't understand in this world. But on a simple level, we believe that, at least according to Rashi, Poseach Chesidecha, God opens his hand. It means literal. He says, come into my hand. I should say, Al Chayinu Misrim B'Yadecha, our lives are in his hands, that we say in Modim, we'll get to. It's literal. It means our lives are in God's hands, and when natisa yamincha, when the hand tilts, things fall. So that's at least Rashi's understanding. I thought it was interesting to share. And of course, today we'll speak about eventually P'seach Hasidecha. But I don't want to. We started and did most of Mizmor Soda. I don't want to skip. It's a very important tefilah. So we said that we stand for Mizmor Soda. This we did discuss. It's been 3 weeks, I guess, at this point where we were up to Mizmor Soda. So that's because the Shari Tshuva says we stand for any tefilah connected to a korban. Anything that has anything to do with a korban, we stand because, of course, they would stand while bringing and offering the korbanot. So we mentioned, and this is where we got up to, that it's to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all personal miracles. Right? All personal miracles, they would offer a thanksgiving sacrifice in the Beis HaMikdash, a korban toda, for any personal miracle that one has been delivered from danger. So we spoke about the idea of Gomel a few weeks ago, if you remember, that's our opportunity today as in 2023. It's interesting, in other parts of davening, we thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the miracles we're aware of, but Mizmor Soda is really thanking Hashem for the times that we're not truly aware of, at least today. The time of the Beis HaMikdash was very obvious. A miracle happened, or you were saved from some type of danger, so you showed up to the Beis HaMikdash the next day and you brought a korban. It was very clear, it's very obvious, your public recognition of the miracle that Hashem gave or showed to you in your family. Today it's a little different, so what we do is we say it every day. Well, we'll see, most days. Someone asked the question, why don't we say it certain days? We'll talk about that in a second. That was a couple weeks ago. But Mizmor L'Soda is our opportunity to thank Hashem for the innumerable times that He saves us without our awareness, without us knowing what's going on. Think about how many things have to go right in the world for us to wake up every morning. Think about how many things have to go right. That's the line I always use from Avigdor Miller, Lo Aleinu. It shouldn't happen, but if someone, even someone who has a few red blood cells, for example, or cells that are unfortunately cancerous, we think about the billions of cells that a person has that are okay. Of course, we know that in this world, all it takes is a few of those cells. It doesn't make it any easier, but just the idea, the percentage that Victor Miller says, it's incredible. 99.999% of the things, everything else went well. Of course, on a test, someone gets one question wrong. Okay, that's wonderful. Of course, we know in life it's not like that. Sometimes one question wrong can unfortunately be tragic and terrible. Nonetheless, the idea being that so much goes right in our lives, unfortunately, we focus on the negative, the 1%, the negative, the 0.00%. I, of course, do this. Everyone does this. This is human nature. So Mizmor L'Soda offers us the opportunity to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all the miracles, perhaps the ones we don't even think about or know about. That, the car didn't swerve into our lane. The car was going to swerve into our lane, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it so we didn't even realize what happens.
It's just important not to skip. I mean, I know sometimes we all... Truthfully, I'm not always so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shorter one, so I say, if you're going to say it, it's not going to be part of the Baruch Shemar Ashrei Yishtabach getting you to the Birchas Kriyas Shema. This is another one of the prakim of Tehillim that will get you carry, or Divrei Yamim for part of Zukas Nimrod that just carry you through. So I'm not going to say, it's like my students ask, is this important? Do we have to say this? I don't know how to answer that. Yes, very good. I don't know. The simple answer is, Linda, if you're pressed for time, then yeah, I would say Baruch Shamar Yishtabach, Baruch Shamar Ashrei Yishtabach. Because Baruch Shamar is the before, as we'll see, Yishtabach the after, Bracha Rishona, Bracha Achrona, Ashrei, we'll see, is also important. They're all important. I don't like using the word. I know what you meant, though. I know exactly what you meant, and that's fine. Okay, so someone said, why don't we, it's interesting if you point out, certain tefillah we don't say when we wouldn't be saying Tachanun, which is generally on a happy day. Right? So that's the old joke. What makes it a happy day? You don't say Tachanun. No. Okay. But that's usually the rule. When it's a happy-ish day, I say ish because, I don't know, Tu B'Shvat, is that really like a Yom Tov these days? Some people like Tu B'Shvat. Great. Kol HaKavod. I'll give you others. Lag BaOmer, fine. But there are some other ones that you didn't even know were Chagim, and we're not saying Tachanun on. Erev Lag BaOmer, on Mincha before. I mean, come on. Maybe you're getting ready. Erev Tu B'Shvat. Are you really, that one I have, it is what it is. It's a chag. It's a k'tzat yantiv, the Ramah says by Lag BaOmer. Okay, so it's a quasi-holiday. Nonetheless, so Mizmor Soda is different. We don't say, it's nothing to do with the absence of Tachanun or a happy day. Mizmor L'Soda, we don't say it on Shabbos, Yom Tov, including Chol HaMoed Pesach. We'll see why in a second. Maybe you can figure out the common denominator between these things, these dates. Erev Pesach and Erev Yom Kippur. So now I threw a wrench there with the last one. But what do these days have in common? Okay, so the Korban Todah, it was accompanied with, maybe this will help, with 40 loaves of bread, 10 of which had to be chametz. So we're not going to say Mizmor L'Soda anytime where you can't have chametz. So you're saying, what do you mean? I can't have chametz Pesach. Okay, Erev Pesach also. That eliminates Erev Pesach. But the problem is, since you had the day and that evening to eat the Korban Todah, we say anytime you could not have brought the Korban Todah, because you would only bring the Korban Todah if you had that night to eat it as well. So that eliminates not just when chametz can be eaten that day, but the following night. So that's going to eliminate, of course, Erev Pesach. It's going to eliminate all Pesach. Erev Yom Kippur, right? You can't eat. So there we say you don't say Mizmor L'Soda. Now, Shabbos, there's nothing wrong with eating chametz, as we know, but we don't say that on Shabbos Yom Tov. It's one of the personal reflections that we don't pray for on Shabbos Yom Tov. Linda.
Rabbi, sometimes, some people continue to eat matzah all throughout the year.
Right.
So, what then?
Here it's talking about the absence of chametz. You can eat matzah anytime you want, except for maybe Erev Pesach. But you could eat matzah on every other day of the year. Here we're talking about when you can't eat chametz, so then the korban couldn't be brought. And it's asked, well, just bring the korban, and so you'll eat it quicker. You'll finish it by Shabbos, by Yom Tov, whatever it is. You'll finish it quicker. But we don't like to do that when it comes to korbanos. We don't like to limit the time. The Torah says you have one day and one night, right? That day that you bring it and that night to eat it. So if you know that you can't eat it that night because it's Yom Kippur that night, you can't eat chametz or any food item at night. So we say, just don't, better not to bring it, better to avoid bringing it altogether. So that's why we don't say the Korban Todah, the Mizmor L'Soda, which is corresponding to the Korban Todah, we don't say it on days where either that day or that night you would not be able to eat chametz or bring a korban. So that eliminates Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov, Pesach, the Chol HaMoed Pesach, that's why Chol HaMoed Sukkos we do say it, and Erev Pesach as well. Okay. Very good. So that's what the Beis HaMikdash is made of. We have various opportunities for people, and every korban was brought based off of their financial level. I mean, it was a beautiful thing that was held completely. I mean, the sensitivity of the Beis HaMikdash, we spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, about how the korban chatas, right, and the korban olah was the same area to go through, so no one should know if you're bringing a sin offering or a normal offering. It was a similar idea by the financial system, where you would buy and you wouldn't know what money you're spending on which korban. It was a beautiful idea, but there was certain korbanos could be brought from certain animals, so of course fowls cheaper than meat, right? And then domesticated animal, and then of course there's a korban mincha, which is flour, which is obviously much cheaper than animal. Excellent.
I'm sorry, I forgot what korbanos meant.
So the offerings, the sacrifices they would bring, the sacrifices they would bring in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, so that's that. Let's get to Ashrei now. So Ashrei, really it shouldn't be called Ashrei. If you think about it, it should not be called Ashrei. What should it be called? Very good, Tila David. Right? It's Perek Kuf Mem Hey. So for those, now we're getting towards the end of Tehillim, and we're going to conclude Tehillim in a minute, because by the end of Sukkot Zimra, it finishes with the last 5 prakim of Tehillim. So we're really getting there. So this is Perek Kuf Mem Hey of Tehillim. So for those of us who are familiar with Tehillim more so than Ashrei, it's called Tila David. That's the first words of Ashrei. So it's not. We'll see why we call it Ashrei. We commonly refer to it because the psukim that precede it, but it's really should be called Tila David. We call it Ashrei. It's catchier. Like we say, we'll see Shmona Esrei. Shmona Esrei should not be called Shmona Esrei. Why? Because they're not 18 brachos. But the Big Ten Conference in college football shouldn't be called the Big Ten Conference because there's 14 teams. Why do they call it the Big Ten Conference? Because there were 10 teams when they started. So why do they call it Shmona Esrei? Because there were 18 brachos when they started. It's a catchy name. We kept the name, and zehu. Okay, so we add 2 psukim from Tehillim, where each pasuk begins with Ashrei. So that's how we get the name Ashrei. It's an appropriate name. I'm not starting a campaign to start calling it Tila David. I'm just pointing out that the beginning of Kuf Mem Hey is Tila David, not Ashrei. Important we know that. where is the Ashreys? It's actually from halfway through Tehillim. It's 84. I mean, we're all the way back to Pei Dalet, going back with Ashrei Yoshev Yisecho, Jalu Chasela. That's Pei Dalet in Tehillim, and Pasuk Hey of that. And then we jump a little closer to the end of Tehillim, although still 10 prakim shy, 15 prakim shy. Then we jump to Kuf Mem Dalid, where we say Ashrei Ha'am Shekachalo, Ashrei Ha'am Shekachalo, Aklav. So really, kind of the fact that it's called Ashrei is just because we took two psukim earlier from Sefer Tehillim that happened to begin with the word Ashrei. That's how we started. But then we jump into the rest of Perek Kuf Mem Hey, which is Tehillah David. Just a pet peeve of mine, but we call it Ashrei because that's what it's called. Don't worry. Okay. Why is Perek Kuf Mem Hey Tehillim so special? Why are we davening? Why are we adding it to our tefilah 3 times a day? The only Perek of Tehillim we say 3 times a day as part of our davening. We do add many prakim of Tehillim into our daily davening. We add, as we saw, many prakim of Divrei Yamim. We add prakim throughout Tanakh as a part of our daily davening. But in my understanding, no Perek of Tehillim gets added in its entirety more than once. At the very least, definitely not 3 times. So Kuf Mem Hey must be really special because it's part of our davening 3 times a day. So there are many reasons given. We'll just add 2. Number 1, the Gemara, this is really the Gemara that says this. It's an acrostic of the letters of the Aleph Beis. We've noticed that, right? Aleph Beis Gimel. Ashrei Yoshev Yisecha, right? We go on. Each one goes B'chol Yom, Gadol, right? We continue each one through the letter. Also a good way to memorize it, because then you know, if you forget where you are in Ashrei and you want to memorize any tefilah, so you know that, if you're up to Yud, if you just finished Tes and you're about to start Chaf, so you know you forgot Yoducha Hashem, because you know the Yud. A nice way of remembering it. Okay, so that's one, but that's not the only Perek of Tehillim you'll notice, as the Gemara famously points out. That's not the only Perek of Tehillim that does that. That's a pretty, I shouldn't say common, but it's a pretty popular, we see this especially throughout Kinos, right? It's a pretty popular way of describing poetry, especially in Jewish liturgy as well. That's pretty common to follow the Aleph Beis format or follow some type of pattern. Oh, sorry. Okay. So that's one answer, but because it's not the only one, it can't be the only reason why Ashrei is so special. Another possibility, which we began this year with, is because of the pasuk of Poseach Hasidecha. So all of the chapters in Tanakh that follow that sort of lovely Aleph Beis pattern don't also carry the pasuk of Poseach Hasidecha, which, as we discussed, is a very important pasuk where we say, without this we could not live. That's the I wouldn't say the most important pasuk, but the most important pasuk of Ashrei at the very least. So those 2 things combined make Ashrei incredibly important. As the Torah says, that the Yoser Yichavin pasuk Poseach Hasidecha, you should have extra kavanah by this pasuk. She'ikar ma shekvua lomar b'chol yom hu b'shvil osa pasuk. Whatever you're saying doesn't compare to what you're saying in Poseach Hasidecha. You're essentially saying, we have you, God. We have no way of living without you. Whether you take it literally, like we tried to offer in the beginning of this year, or figuratively, either way, Poseach Hasidecha, you open your hand. We're not getting anything without you opening up your hand. Okay, so that's what Torah says.
Why do you touch the tefillin?
So it's also, we have this various idea of Poseach es yadecha, so you touch the arm tefillin, must be l'chol chai ratzon, that represents the brain, the mind. So we do that a few times throughout davening. Again, it's not ma'akev, it's not essential, but it's a nice idea. Ukshartem l'os al yadecha, right? You touch your hand tefillin, because that's the os, the sign that's on your hand. V'ayu l'totafos beinenecha, and that's the head tefillin. So it's like, we're like we're visual learners in Judaism, but we're also, we like to act while we show we know what we're talking about, right? So you can tell students from today to tomorrow, here's the story, but if they can express to you in a visual format, right? That's the newest, that's why if I ask a question in class and the answer is a number, let's say 1 to 10. So how many Shemona Esrei do we daven on Yom Kippur? So the answer is 4. So let's just say theoretically. So, so on a show of fingers, how many, and yeah, people will look at each other's fingers from time to time, but you'll get, instead of asking the question and 1 out of 26 girls answering the question, what will happen? About 11 or 12 of the girls will now be able to successfully answer the question, and then you'll go to the girl in the back who has 3 fingers, you say, no, 1 more finger, and she'll figure out and she'll visualize that there are 4. So I think that's why we do it throughout our davening. We're talking about the hand tefillin, touch the hand tefillin. Talking about the head tefillin, touch that, it kind of like helps us appreciate, no, we're not just saying words, we're connecting to a Kadosh Baruch Hu in that way. That's my understanding of it. Okay, so very important pasuk. Posech Chasidecha is in Kuf Mem Hey, and it follows Aleph Beis. Those two things make it Ashrei, I guess you would say. Okay. The Gemara in Brachos says, we've mentioned this Gemara before outside, but a very important Gemara. The Gemara says, Amar Belazar, Kola Omer Tila David. Again, the Gemara calls it Tila David because it starts with Tila David. Bechol Yom Gimel Pamin, Muvtal Chlusha Ben Olam Haba. Anyone who says Ashrei 3 times a day, free ticket out of here. Now, Zochel Olam Haba. So, it's a very interesting Gemara why saying one parak of Tehillim will get you into Olam Haba. So I think my understanding when I was younger, I asked this question. The answer I received was that anyone who is saying Ashrei 3 times a day is so careful and so conscientious about their tefilah and is going out of their way to say things like Ashrei, which isn't a part of the core of davening. It's just an added, quote unquote, parak of Tehillim we add to the Zukah de Zimra. So that person is definitely going to Olam Haba anyways, because they're so conscientious about life, they're careful about their tefillah, they're careful about the way they start their day. Does that mean that someone who murders people can't say Parakuf Memhei of Tehillim? Of course, So there obviously the Gemara is not just there's a lot to unpack that we do not have time to unpack that Gemara and Daf Dalet on Brachos, but nonetheless, that's the simple understanding of it. So we say. Well, very good. Although we don't say it Amar. We say Shachris and twice and Mincha. But yeah, it's 3 times a day. So in theory, it's a discussion if you could if you miss Mincha, can you make it up by davening by Mariv?
I'm going to say 3 times down the road.
Correct. Although I think someone who wants to say 3 Prakim of Tehillim, every day, I think that's they're probably going all Haba also.
Shachris, you say it twice.
And then once in Mincha. So that's 3 times in your 2 daily, right? Because Marv's at night. You have 2 daily Shemon Esreis that you say every day. So Shachris and Mincha. That's my understanding of the Gemara. So it's B'chol Yom Gimel Pamim. So that's why we say it 3 times every day in Pesukei de Zimra, after Shemon Esrei of Shachris and before Mincha. Which of those 3 is more important? We're not going to discuss right now. But for now, it doesn't mean that's true. You can't just. It's like they say by Shnayim Mikra. So those who go over the parsha twice and its targum and its translation every day. So the Gemara every week. So the Gemara explains you can't just the Gemara's one opinion says, okay, great. So after the cycle starts for Bereshis, so someone just stayed up all night Simchas Torah and they just finished the whole parsha. They went from Bereshis until V'zos HaBrachas. The whole point is we want to do it. We break it up weekly for a very specific reason, so that every week we come into the parsha like that. Erev Yom Kippur, because we do, because we don't know what you're thinking of. That would be Yom Kippur. Yes, but we don't know because we don't say it by Mincha. We skip it by Mincha for an interesting reason we will get to if we get to Yom Kippur. Why we skip Mincha. Mincha starts with taking out the Torah on Yom Kippur. And then we go into Yonah, and then we go to Shemon Esrei. But on Ne'ilah, that's when we start with Ashrei. We don't start with Mincha on Ne'ilah. There's a different reason for that, but it's a good question. So that we still don't get to 3, more than 3, I don't think, unless you just like saying Kuf Mem Hey to yourself, and you happen to say it. But yeah, so that's that. At least that part of Ashrei. Let's see. Should we finish it? Okay, you want to go a little further?
Sure.
Okay, so let's get to the question: what is missing from Ashrei? What's missing? The nun. I mean, it's David HaMelech knew how to count. I mean, he knew the letters, right? So how do you miss the nun? Okay, he didn't do.
No fel?
Very good. It starts with no fel. It starts with fall. So the Gemara in Brachos, that same Gemara in Brachos in Daf Dalet Amud Beis 4b says that the letter nun is missing. So the Gemara says David didn't want to include the nun in Ashrei because it's the first letter of a pasuk that predicted the downfall of Klal Yisrael. And then the Gemara famously says, but there are a lot of other bad psukim that start with the letters Tet and Resh, and okay. But nun was the worst. We'll see why in a second. The pasuk in Amos says this is the worst of the predictions of our downfall. Nafla lo tosif kum b'sulas Yisrael. That we fell. Why is it such a such a traumatic pasuk for us? Because it says kum b'sulas Yisrael. We'll never be able to get up. So that's a bad one. It's not just we'll fall, but it's a permanent fall.
So what ches is chet?
Right. Yeah, that's why we don't say, the Chachamim seem to pick and choose, right? Because Chet, that's why we don't have nuts on Rosh Hashanah, because Gematria Chet, sort of, -1. But you're allowed to be one off. It's not math. You're allowed to be one off. So, yes, that is what it is. But, so David skipped the nun based off this pasuk. He skipped the nun based on the pasuk in Amos, and proceeded directly to the Samach, right? Went right to the Samach to say, Someach Hashem l'chol hanoflim. So that's what the Gemara says, that Nofel got in there. The Nun got in there, but not on its own. Right? It's okay that Hashem will support all who fall. It's interesting because that pasuk Someach, there are those who understand the pasuk in Amos to be in the positive. Nafla lo tosif, right? Go back to that pasuk for a second. Nafla lo tosif, we fell, right? Lo tosif kum sulat, that we'll never be able to get back up. So they learn, no, naf, that's the famous closed, no swimming, right? You can't go into the pool, right? No, closed, question mark, no, comma, swimming, exclamation mark. Of course, closed, no, swimming. So it depends how you punctuate the sign, right? You ever seen that? So, simple punctuation can change everything. So hold on, so 1 second. So there are those who understand the pasuk to be in the positive. Nafla lo tosif, comma, as in Bnei Yisrael will not continue to fall. Kum b'silas Yisrael will always get up. So according to that, David shouldn't have skipped it. But nonetheless, that at least explains why he took the nun out. But then he kind of made part 1 and part 2 with Somech. So we're kind of still in the nun stage, and if you want, you could put a line, before that, if you want to appreciate the nun aspect, especially anyone's name starts with a nun. No, let's see. Naomi. Well, I'm saying looking around here. No, I don't think so. Okay, not the most popular letter for a name, but not because of any issue. Naomi, right? Naphtali, right? No, just that isn't. I don't think there's no reason for that. I don't think I've never heard someone say, I'm not going to name my son or daughter with a nun because it starts, maybe don't name your son or daughter after a Russia in the Torah. That we don't have many Nimrods. There's a nun. Although there is a Nimrod in Israel apparently. It's very interesting. I read an article, but nonetheless.